The dim lights of Station Meridian 7's Veterans Hall cast long shadows across empty tables where old soldiers gathered to forget. Routh sat alone in his usual corner, his four chitinous arms wrapped around a glass of something strong enough to dull memories that refused to fade. 15 years had passed since the war ended, but some nights he could still hear the screams. The human screams were always the worst because they never stopped fighting even when they should have been dead. "Excuse me, Commander Routh," a young voice interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see a Salthine journalist, her sensor tendrils quivering with nervous energy. "My name is Ymora. I'm documenting veteran experiences for the Historical Archive. I was hoping you might share some of your service record." Routh's compound eyes fixed on her recording equipment. "The war is over. Let it stay buried." "Please," Ymora pressed forward. "I've interviewed dozens of veterans. Every time I mention humans, they change the subject. The official records don't match the casualty reports. Something happened out there that nobody wants to talk about." Something in her persistence reminded Routh of the human soldiers he'd known. They never accepted no for an answer either. "If I tell you," he said slowly, "you have to promise to publish exactly what I say. No editing, no softening the truth. Can you do that?" Ymora's tendrils stiffened with determination. "Every word, I promise." Routh signaled for another drink. "Then I'll tell you about Brynhold Station. That's where I learned humans were different from every other species in the galaxy." The memory came back sharp and clear. Routh had been a special operations commander then, leading 300 Quentari shock troops in what should have been a simple defensive mission. Brynhold was a mining station on the outer rim, valuable but not critical. Intelligence suggested a small Ravager raiding force might target it. Coalition Command assigned Routh's battalion plus a human contingent for support. 40 humans, Routh said. "That's all they sent. I remember thinking it was insulting. My troops had fought in a dozen major engagements. We were elite soldiers, and Command paired us with 40 humans for what they called tactical support." Lieutenant Gray commanded the human unit. Routh remembered their first meeting in the station's briefing room. Gray was shorter than most. Humans, soft-spoken, with eyes that seemed too calm for someone in a combat zone. "Your troops take point," Gray had said. "We'll handle logistics and rear security." Routh had agreed immediately, relieved that the humans knew their place. His Quentari warriors would do the real fighting while the humans moved supplies and guarded equipment. It seemed like a perfect arrangement. The Ravagers hit Brynhold 3 days later with twice the expected force. They breached the outer hull in 4 places simultaneously, venting atmosphere and sending Routh's carefully prepared defenses into chaos. His troops scrambled to seal the breaches while fighting off enemy boarding parties. It was textbook crisis management until Gray's voice came over the command channel. "Lieutenant Gray to Commander Routh, requesting permission to handle the primary breach." Routh barely heard the request over the sound of his own troops calling for reinforcements. "Granted," he snapped. "Seal it and fall back to secondary positions." What happened next violated everything Routh thought he knew about warfare. The humans didn't seal the breach. They ran toward it. Routh watched on the tactical display as 40 human signatures sprinted directly into the exposed section where the Ravagers were pouring through. He tried to raise Gray on the command channel. "What are you doing? Fall back and seal that section." "Negative," Gray's voice was unnaturally calm. "We're handling it." Handling it meant fighting in the breach itself. Routh pulled up the visual feeds and immediately wished he hadn't. Humans were fighting in the vacuum transition zone where any suit puncture meant instant death. They used the zero gravity like they'd been born in it, turning the chaotic space into an ambush point. Their weapons were crude ballistic rifles that punched holes in station walls. Every shot risked decompression. "They're insane," Routh, second in command, hissed. "They'll kill us all." But the breach held. Humans positioned themselves in the torn metal of the hull, using the wreckage as cover while they cut down Ravager shock troops. Routh watched a human soldier take a plasma bolt that melted through their armor. The tactical display should have shown them dead. Instead, the signature kept moving, kept firing for 6 more minutes before finally going dark. The battle lasted 4 hours. When the Ravagers finally retreated, HFY's troops had suffered 12 casualties. The humans had lost 19, nearly half their force. The primary breach they defended was still open, still exposed to space, but not a single Ravager had made it through. HFY found Gray in the medical bay, supervising treatment for wounded soldiers. "Why?" HFY demanded. "Why would you fight in conditions that could kill you instantly?" Gray looked at him with those too calm eyes. "Someone had to hold that breach. We were closest, so we handled it. 19 of your soldiers died. 21 are alive," Gray corrected. "And so is everyone on this station. That's what matters." HFY tried to explain that there had been safer methods, better tactics, options that wouldn't have cost so many lives. Gray listened patiently, then said something that HFY would never forget. "Commander, my troops and I accept a simple truth. We're all going to die eventually. The only question is whether our deaths mean something. Today they meant keeping people alive. I'll take that trade every time." Yamora's recording device trembled in her manipulator. "They wanted to die." "No," HFY said firmly. "That's what everyone thinks. That's what makes it worse. Humans don't want to die. They just don't let the fear of death stop them from doing what they think is necessary. Every other species in the galaxy calculates survival probability before commitment. Humans calculate objective value. If the mission is worth doing, they'll do it. Survival is preferable but optional." He took a long drink. "That was just a minor defensive action, a footnote in the war records, and it taught me that human combat doctrine isn't built on courage or training or technology. It's built on acceptance. They accept their mortality so completely that they can weaponize it." "Is that why other veterans won't talk about humans?" HFY's expression darkened. "That's just the beginning. Brynhold showed me humans were different. What came later showed me exactly how different, and how willing the Coalition was to exploit that difference." "Tell me," Yamura said. HFY signaled for another drink. "Then I'll tell you about Operation Crimson Descent. That's when I learned what happens when you give humans an impossible mission. They find a way to make it possible, and the cost is always higher than anyone wants to count." HFY ordered something stronger before continuing, his anterior. Limbs trembled slightly as he prepared to relive what came next. "Operation Crimson Descent was supposed to be straightforward," he began. 12 species contributed forces to assault a Ravager fortress world and rescue prisoners. The planning took weeks, every commander presenting strategies to minimize casualties. Then the humans sent their proposal. HFY's voice carried bitter memory. Captain Reed walked into that briefing room with 2 companies, 300 soldiers, and a plan that made every other commander go silent. Yamura leaned forward. "What did they propose?" "They proposed falling," HFY said flatly. "The fortress had planetary shields that couldn't be penetrated by conventional assault. Reed suggested their troops would drop from orbit in unpowered exoskeletons, use the shield energy discharge to burn through the barrier. Survival probability was 12%. Reed presented this like discussing lunch options. The Drouthian admiral commanding the operation had approved immediately. HFY remembered the calculating look in those reptilian eyes. Here was a chance to accomplish the mission while spending human lives instead of more valuable troops. Other commanders objected on ethical grounds. Reed had simply asked if anyone had a better plan that could breach those shields. Nobody did. "I watched those humans prepare," HFY continued. "They spent 3 days checking equipment, writing letters home, joking with each other like they were planning a vacation. I asked one of their sergeants if he understood the survival numbers. He said yes. I asked why he was still going. He looked at me like I'd asked why water was wet. Said there were 400 prisoners down there who were counting on someone to get them out. The operation launched at dawn. HFY's unit positioned in assault shuttles, ready to exploit whatever breach the humans created. He watched on tactical displays as human soldiers simply stepped out of their transport ships at orbital height. No propulsion systems, no safety protocols, just armored bodies falling toward a planet that wanted them dead. The Fortress anti-air systems couldn't track individual targets that small moving that fast, Hralth explained. But what they could track, they vaporized. I watched 47 human signatures disappear before they even reached the shield perimeter. Just gone, erased from existence, the rest kept. Falling, 211 humans hit the shields at terminal velocity. Their exoskeletons channeled the massive energy discharge back through the shield matrix. Hralth described seeing the fortress defenses ripple and collapse in sections. 89 were still transmitting vitals after impact. 89 out of 300, and they immediately engaged fortress defenses from inside the perimeter. When Hralth's shuttles landed through the breached shields, they found chaos. Humans had already penetrated 3 fortress levels using nothing but breaching charges and determination. Their tactics made no sense, Hralth said. They didn't consolidate positions, didn't establish supply lines, didn't wait for support. They just kept pushing forward, leaving their wounded behind with instructions to slow down Ravager reinforcements. Ymura's recording device shook. They abandoned their wounded. Not abandoned, Hralth corrected. Positioned. I found a human soldier with both legs severed below the knees. He dragged himself to a corridor chokepoint and was still firing at Ravager troops. When my medics tried to evacuate him, he refused. Said he was more useful there. Said his job was buying time for the others to reach the prisoners. The soldier's name had been Private Collins, 19 standard years old. He'd held that position for 40 minutes before dying. His weapon's barrel had been warped from overheating. There were 63 dead Ravagers in that corridor. The humans reached the prisoner compound first. Hralth's voice went very quiet. We arrived to find they'd already secured it. 400 prisoners were safe. But the Ravagers had executed 30 of them when they detected the breach, just killed them out of spite. What happened next still haunted Hralth's dreams. The humans found the executioners. What they did violated 17 interstellar conventions on treatment of enemy combatants. I won't describe the details. I'll just say it was systematic, creative, and completely unnecessary from a tactical standpoint. When Hralth confronted Captain Reed about the treaty violations, the humans' response had been delivered in that same calm voice. Commander, humans have a concept called proportional response. When enemies harm the helpless, proportionality ends. Those Ravagers murdered prisoners. They stopped being soldiers and became something else, something we deal with. Accordingly, there was no anger in Reed's tone, no rage or hatred, just cold certainty, like stating a law of physics. Hralth had realized then that human morality operated on principles completely alien to his understanding. The operation succeeded, Hralth continued. We rescued 412 prisoners. The human companies suffered 87% casualties. Of 300 who deployed, 39 walked back to the extraction shuttles. The Drouthian admiral praised the efficiency, commended the humans for their sacrifice. None of them smiled. They just looked tired. Ymura was silent for a long moment. Why would they accept such losses? That's the question that haunted me, Hralth admitted. I studied humans after Crimson Descent, watched them, listened to them, tried to understand. What I learned was worse than not knowing. He explained that humans didn't just accept death in combat. They incorporated it into their strategic planning. Every human tactical doctrine assumes casualties, plans around them, uses them. A human commander doesn't ask how to accomplish an objective without losses. They ask what loss ratio is acceptable for success. They don't fight to survive. They fight to complete the mission. Survival is just a bonus. After Crimson Descent, I requested detailed briefings on human military history, Hralth said. What I found terrified me. Humans have been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. They've developed warfare into an art form. They know exactly how many soldiers they can lose and still function. They know how to use casualties to demoralize enemies. They know how to turn dying into a tactical advantage. Yamora's tendrils had gone completely rigid, and the Coalition used this extensively. Atralth's voice carried deep shame. After Crimson Descent, Coalition Command began giving humans the impossible missions. The suicide runs, the desperate defenses, and humans took them. Every single time, they volunteered, they planned, they executed, they died in numbers that would break any other species, and they kept volunteering. Another veteran approached their table, an elderly Metherian with scars covering half his face. "You're telling the human stories," he said to Atralth. "Yes." The Metherian nodded slowly. "Tell her about Dalworth. She needs to understand what humans become when you threaten their wounded." Atralth's exoskeleton actually shivered. "I was getting to that." "Dalworth," Ymora repeated. "What happened there?" Atralth took a long drink. "Dalworth was where I learned that humans have limits, not limits on what they'll sacrifice, limits on what they'll tolerate being done to others. It's where I saw humans transform from disciplined soldiers into something primal, something terrifying, something beautiful and horrifying at the same time." He looked at Yamora's recording device. "The Ravagers made a mistake at Dalworth. They threatened human wounded. They thought it would force surrender. Instead, they triggered something in the human psyche that I still don't fully understand, something that makes them capable of truly frightening things." Several more veterans had gathered at nearby tables, drawn by the conversation like moths to flame. They sat silent, remembering their own encounters with humanity's darker nature. Atralth acknowledged them with a nod before continuing. "Dalworth was a moon," he began, "barely habitable, but it served as a field hospital for Coalition forces. 6,000 wounded from multiple species, clearly marked under interstellar medical conventions, protected by every treaty we'd signed. It should have been the safest place in the war zone. 3 years into the war, Ravager Command changed tactics. They decided to target medical facilities," Atralth explained. "Their strategists believed most species would negotiate once their wounded were threatened. Dalworth was chosen for the demonstration. A Ravager battle group emerged from slip space directly above the moon." The transmission had been broadcast on all frequencies. Atralth could still recite it from memory. The Ravagers would bombard Dalworth unless Coalition forces surrendered 3 strategic systems. 6-hour deadline, visual evidence of weapons locked on the hospital complex. "Coalition Command went into emergency session," Atralth said. "The tactical consensus was clear. We couldn't defend Dalworth in time. Evacuation was the only option." But the human medical ship Nightingale had been resupplying Dalworth when the Ravagers arrived. Captain Oren refused evacuation orders. "I listened to the transmission," Atralth said. "Oren sent a message directly to the Ravager battle group, just one sentence. 'You have threatened our wounded. This is not acceptable. Leave or die here.' The Ravagers found this hilarious. There. Admiral broadcast mockery across all channels, one medical ship against a battle group. What the Ravagers didn't know," Atralth continued, "was that humans have a protocol. They call it Broken Arrow. It means human wounded are in imminent danger. When that protocol activates, every human vessel within range responds. No exceptions, no delays, everything else becomes secondary." The Nightingale positioned itself between Dalworth and the Ravager fleet. It activated every emergency beacon. "For almost 6 hours, nothing happened," Atralth said. "The Ravagers prepared their bombardment, made speeches about Coalition weakness, threatened to execute wounded if demands weren't met. Captain Oren just kept the Nightingale in position, didn't retreat, didn't negotiate, just waited." At 5 hours and 57 minutes, the first human reinforcements arrived. Not military vessels. Atralth's voice carried wonder even years later. Civilian ships, cargo haulers, mining rigs, passenger transports, every human vessel that could reach Dalworth in time. They came through slip space like an avalanche, and they all took up positions around the moon. Yamora's tendrils were trembling. "How many?" 47 ships in the first wave," Atralth said. "Within the next hour, 200 more arrived. The Ravager Admiral sent a final warning. Surrender or watch the hospital burn. The humans didn't send a reply. They just opened fire." What followed violated every principle of rational warfare. Cargo ships rammed battle cruisers, medical shuttles conducted attack runs on weapons platforms, mining vessels turned industrial cutting lasers on warship armor. It was chaos, H. Ralph said. Beautiful, terrible chaos. These weren't trained military units. These were civilians, merchants, doctors, families on passenger liners, and they all fought like humans had been born to war. H. Ralph's battle group was 3 hours away when this started. He monitored the transmissions. What disturbed me wasn't the violence, he admitted. It was the coordination. These people had never trained together, never practiced combined operations, but they fought with unified purpose. Every destroyed vessel bought time for reinforcements. They were trading lives for minutes, and they all knew it. By the time H. Ralph arrived, the battlefield had transformed. 47 human vessels destroyed, he said, but 200 more had answered the call. The Ravager battle group was surrounded, outnumbered, and I could hear the fear in their communications. The human fleet didn't offer surrender terms. Admiral Rodriguez transmitted on all frequencies one simple message. You threatened our wounded. You have one chance to run. If you fire a single shot, none of you leave this system alive. The transmission included tactical data, more human ships still arriving, civilian vessels being retrofitted into weapons platforms, passenger liners mounting missile batteries. The Ravagers ran, H. Ralph said. A full battle group retreated from civilians because those civilians were human, and humans don't accept threats to their wounded. H. Ralph's forces secured Dalworth. He went surface-side to assess the situation. The human medical staff never stopped working, he said with something like awe. While their people fought and died in orbit, human doctors kept treating the wounded, performing surgery, saving lives. I found Dr. Phillips in an operating theater. She was working on a Quentari soldier. Her hands were completely steady. H. Ralph had asked if she knew what happened in orbit. Phillips confirmed she'd monitored the battle. I asked why she seemed so calm, H. Ralph said. Her response haunts me. She said, they did what humans do. We take care of our own, and everyone here became our own when they got hurt. That's when H. Ralph understood. Human protective instincts didn't distinguish by species. Wounded meant family, he explained. Didn't matter if you were human or alien. If you were hurt and under human protection, they would die for you. It wasn't rational, wasn't tactical, it was instinct. After Dalworth, Ravagers never targeted another medical facility. Coalition intelligence intercepted their internal communications, H. Ralph said. Ravager Command concluded that attacking human wounded triggered irrational response. What they called irrational, humans called principle. Yamura sat silent, processing this. Finally, she asked, is this why humans became respected in the coalition? H. Ralph's laugh was bitter. Respect came later. At the time, we were frightened. Humans had demonstrated they would sacrifice anything to protect the injured. This made them unpredictable, dangerous. Coalition Command began treating them differently, and that's where the real darkness begins. He signaled for another drink. Dalworth taught Coalition Command how to use humans if you needed a position held regardless of cost. Send humans. If you needed an objective taken regardless of casualties, send humans. They would do it without complaint. They would succeed or die trying. I participated in this exploitation. H. Ralph's voice carried deep shame. 3 months after Dalworth, Coalition Command needed a communications relay defended for 72 hours. They sent a human company. My unit was supposed to reinforce at hour 48. We arrived at hour 71. Of 140 humans defending that relay, 11 were still combat effective. The position never fell, H. Ralph said. They succeeded. The human commander was still at his post, coordinating fire. Both his legs were gone below the hips. He'd been fighting for 3 days on trauma medication and determination. Yamura was silent for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was small. Why are you telling me this? Because the galaxy needs to know, H. Ralph said. Needs to know what humans sacrificed, what we asked them to sacrifice. The next story is the worst. Operation Final Resolve, the turning point of the war, and the moment I realized Coalition Command was sending humans to die not because it was necessary, but because it was convenient. The Veterans Hall had grown quiet. A dozen aliens from different species now listened openly. One Vorlian veteran raised a scarred limb and said simply, "Tell it true." Routh nodded. "I will." Operation Final Resolve was designed to end the war, he began. Coalition intelligence located the primary Ravager ship construction facility, a massive orbital complex around a gas giant. Destroying it would cripple their fleet production for years, maybe forever. The complex was defended by 300,000 troops and automated defenses that had never been breached. The assault plan required simultaneous strikes on 47 critical points, timing window of 3 minutes. Any delay would allow automated defenses to reconfigure, Routh explained. Success probability for conventional forces was 4%. Coalition Command decided the operation was necessary regardless of cost. Before other species could debate the ethics, human General Bishop volunteered the entire human expeditionary force, 12,000 soldiers. Bishop stated simply that humans specialized in impossible operations, Routh said. The other commanders were relieved, grateful even. They wouldn't have to order their own people into certain death. Routh was designated liaison to the human assault force, 2 weeks of preparation. What I witnessed changed everything I thought I knew about humans, he said. They knew the casualty projections, expected survival rate was 11%. Planning staff didn't hide the numbers, and the humans approached it like a technical problem. There was no despair, no anger, just focus. They optimized every detail, rehearsed every movement, wrote letters to families, continued training, Routh said. I asked Sergeant Williams about the letters. He explained matter-of-factly that they were probably going to die. Their families deserved to hear it from them. I asked why he was going at all. He looked at me like the question made no sense, said, because if we don't, who will, and if not now, when? That absence of self-preservation haunted Routh. Humans held a ceremony they called Final Formation, he explained. Every soldier stated what they fought for: family, friends, home, peace, each other. Not one mentioned glory or honor. They fought for people, for protection, for the abstract concept of preventing suffering. The assault launched at 400 station time, 12,000 drop pods falling toward the Ravager complex. Minimal shielding, maximum speed, designed to get soldiers planetside fast, not safely. Routh watched from the command vessel as 347 pods were destroyed in descent, 400 humans dead before reaching the objective. What followed defied tactical doctrine. Humans hit all 47 strike points within a 2-minute window, Routh said. They accomplished this through brutal calculation. They didn't avoid defenses. They overwhelmed them with bodies, every automated turret, every kill zone, every choke point. Humans just pushed through, trading lives for seconds. The tactical channels carried calm voices reporting catastrophic losses. Strike Team 7, target secured, 70% casualties, holding position. Strike Team 19, objective complete, 90% casualties, 1 survivor. Not fear, not panic, just status reports, like discussing equipment failures. At minute 4, the Ravager complex began collapsing. Human combat engineers had placed demolition charges with perfect precision. The core reactors went critical, Routh said. The entire structure started its death spiral. Coalition Command ordered immediate evacuation. But 6,000 humans were still inside, still fighting, still buying time for the charges to complete. Routh's support fleet could extract maybe 2,000 in the available time. General Bishop made the final call. Priority to wounded, then specialists, then anyone who could reach extraction points. Routh recited the transmission from memory. All units, mission complete. Withdraw if able, if unable, thank you. It has been an honor. 3,000 humans were still transmitting vitals when the complex exploded. Routh watched those signals disappear. 3,000 lives ended in seconds, he said quietly. Humans who succeeded in their mission but couldn't escape it. What broke Routh wasn't the deaths. It was the post-operation briefing, he said. The operation was declared a perfect success. Casualty rates were within acceptable parameters. Humans were praised for their sacrifice. Nobody questioned whether it had been necessary. HFY stood at that briefing and accused Coalition Command of murder. I stated that they sent humans to die not because it was the only option, but because humans were willing. Other species could have developed alternative strategies, slower approaches, more casualties across all forces, but it was easier to spend human lives. General Bishop stopped him, told me the humans had volunteered, had known the cost, had chosen it freely. HFY's voice carried pain. And that's what destroyed me. Bishop was right. Humans had volunteered, but that didn't make it acceptable to ask. The coalition had become dependent on human self-sacrifice, built strategies around it, HFY said. Stopped looking for better solutions because humans would always volunteer for the impossible. It was exploitation, even if willing. He spent time with returning soldiers, 6,800 survivors. I expected trauma, bitterness, rage, HFY said. Instead, I found exhaustion and quiet satisfaction. They had saved lives, prevented years of war, protected others. To them, the cost was acceptable. This made it worse. They didn't resent being used. HFY requested transfer away from human units after final resolve. I couldn't participate in their exploitation anymore, he said. My commander denied it. I was too valuable as liaison. I threatened resignation. The transfer was. Granted, I never served with humans again, but I never stopped advocating for them. Yamora's recording equipment trembled. Did the coalition learn anything? Did they change? They learned humans would sacrifice anything for others, HFY said bitterly. So they kept asking, kept sending humans to impossible missions, kept accepting their willingness to die. By war's end, humans sustained 43% of all coalition combat deaths while representing only 11% of forces. The mathematics were damning. If humans volunteered, Yamura asked, if they went willingly, was it wrong to accept their sacrifice? HFY had no answer. I've wrestled with this for 15 years, he admitted. Humans gave freely what should never have been asked. Does willingness make exploitation ethical, or does it make it worse? I don't know. He looked at the assembled veterans. There's one more story, he said. One more account that explains why I'm speaking now, why after 15 years I'm willing to testify. It's about what happened after the war, when the coalition tried to forget what humans did, what they paid. A Vorlian veteran spoke up. The memorial vote. Yes, HFY confirmed. The memorial vote, the final insult, the moment that made me an advocate instead of a soldier, because winning the war wasn't enough humiliation for humans. We had to deny them dignity and peace too. Nearly 50 veterans now filled the hall, representing species from across the coalition, all bearing witness to a truth they'd carried silently for years. HFY acknowledged them before beginning the final account. When the war ended, reconstruction began immediately, he said. Coalition species focused on rebuilding, on prosperity, on forgetting the cost. Humans had paid the highest price, but peacetime politics are about resources, not gratitude. Human veterans returned home to overwhelmed support systems. 43% casualties meant hundreds of thousands needed medical care, psychological support, rehabilitation, HFY explained. The human government requested coalition assistance, arguing they'd borne disproportionate losses defending all species. The request went before the Coalition Council. Coalition species faced expensive reconstruction. Supporting human veterans would cost resources they wanted for their own rebuilding, HFY said. Arguments emerged that humans had volunteered, had known risks. That sacrifice, while appreciated, didn't create unlimited obligation. I attended those council sessions, watched politicians who authorized suicide missions question their responsibility. A compromise was suggested. Instead of direct support, fund a grand memorial. Beautiful, symbolic, far cheaper than actual veteran care, HFY said bitterly. The proposal included testimonials, artistic representations, educational programs, everything except resources for traumatized survivors. It was presented as honoring human values. Ambassador Davis led the human delegation. When presented with the memorial proposal, Davis asked one question. Will this monument provide medical care? Will it house homeless veterans? Will it feed their families? The answer was no. Davis stated humans didn't need monuments. They needed support for survivors. The request was denied. The memorial was approved anyway. I spoke against the vote, HFY said. Argued that accepting human sacrifice while denying survivor support was moral cowardice, detailed specific operations, specific costs, specific promises made when humans were needed. My speech was recorded, circulated, ignored. The vote proceeded. 47 coalition species voted. 38 approved the memorial. 5 abstained. Only 4 voted against, HFY said. Humans, Quentari, Metharian, and one species whose representative fought at final resolve. I watched politicians congratulate themselves for honoring sacrifice while human veterans struggled with inadequate care. The monument was completed 3 years after the war. Massive structure on the coalition capital world, depicting human soldiers in heroic poses. Inscribed with noble sentiments about sacrifice and duty, HFY described. I attended the dedication, so did human veterans, thousands of them, many in wheelchairs, many with visible injuries. They stood silent while politicians gave speeches. When the coalition chairman asked for remarks from human veterans, none spoke. Hundreds of humans, thousands of coalition citizens, absolute silence, HFY said. The chairman repeated his request. Finally, Lieutenant Hayes approached the podium. She'd lost both arms at final resolve. Hayes stood before the monument, looked at the politicians, looked at her fellow veterans. She spoke 3 sentences, HFY said. I memorized them. This monument is beautiful. It represents everything we did and everything you failed to do for us afterward. Then she walked away. Every human veteran followed. They left their own dedication ceremony. Coalition leadership stood alone with their beautiful symbol. That moment crystallized everything for HFY. I'd spent years advocating within the system, working through proper channels. Watching Hayes walk away from her own memorial made me realize the system didn't want change. It wanted to commemorate sacrifice without supporting survivors. He began telling these stories publicly, not in official councils where they could be buried, HFY explained, but in public forums, interviews, gatherings like this. I violated confidentiality agreements, risked my pension, faced threats from politicians who wanted the war remembered as glorious, not costly. His testimony sparked wider awareness. Other veterans began speaking. The true cost became public knowledge, HFY said. Coalition populations responded. Grassroots movements demanding veteran support emerged, slowly, inadequately, but real change began. Human veterans received better care. Not from government policy, but because citizens demanded it. 15 years later, HFY continued, human veterans still struggle, still fight for recognition, still deal with wounds from impossible missions. The coalition never officially acknowledged its exploitation, never apologized for accepting willing sacrifice while denying survivor care. The memorial still stands, beautiful and hollow. Yamura asked why he continued, what he hoped to accomplish. Because humans can't tell these stories themselves without seeming bitter, HFY explained. Without diminishing their sacrifice, but I witnessed it, participated in it, failed to stop it. I can testify. These stories aren't just about humans, he said. They're about what societies do with willing sacrifice, how easy it becomes to accept when others volunteer, how quickly gratitude fades when sacrifice becomes inconvenient. Humans were willing to die for the coalition. The coalition was willing to let them. He told Yamura that publishing these accounts would make her unpopular. Coalition politicians prefer the heroic narrative, HFY said. They don't want questions about exploitation, about systemic failure, about moral debt. Before Yamura could respond, a voice came from the corner. You're right about all of it. And Elderly human woman approached, walking with a cane. "Commander Phillips," she introduced herself. "Doctor from Dalworth, I've been listening." Phillips addressed Ymora directly. "Atralth hasn't mentioned one thing. Humans don't view themselves as victims. We made choices, accepted consequences, lived with outcomes. The Coalition's political failures don't diminish what was accomplished. Evil was stopped. Innocents were protected. Species survived. That was the point." "Are you bitter?" Ymora asked. Phillips laughed. "Bitterness is a luxury I can't afford. Too much work still to do. Many human veterans now work in coalition advocacy, not for ourselves, but preventing future exploitation, ensuring no species becomes the next willing sacrifice, building support systems before wars, not hollow monuments after." Atralth watched Phillips with deep respect. "That's what I've learned," he said. "Humans paid a price the Coalition must never forget, not just in memory, but in action, in support, in ensuring their sacrifice meant something beyond political convenience." He looked at Ymora's recording device. "For the record, humans saved the Coalition, paid for it with unprecedented sacrifice, received inadequate support, and would do it again tomorrow if needed. This makes them remarkable. It doesn't make exploitation acceptable. Future generations must learn both lessons." The gathering gradually dispersed, veterans thanking Atralth, sharing contact information with Ymora. Phillips stayed longest. "You can rest now," she told Atralth. "Others will carry this forward." Alone with Ymora, Atralth answered one final question. Knowing everything, having seen everything, what did he think of humans? "They are the best of us," he said quietly. "And we failed them, but they still believe in us. I don't know if we deserve that faith, I just know we must honor it." As Ymora packed her equipment, Atralth gazed at the memorial visible through the viewport. Beautiful, expensive. Hollow, he thought of Hayes walking away, of Phillips still working, of 3,000 humans vaporized at final resolve, of the galaxy they saved, of the debt unpaid. "I'll be here next week," he told Ymora, "and the week after, telling these stories to anyone who will listen, until the Coalition remembers not just the sacrifice, but the obligation, until monuments become support, until gratitude becomes action. Some missions don't end with the war."